Good day. This is the Professor, CBMD PhD. It's today Saturday, June 20th, 2026. It is 8:45 and 28 seconds, p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And today's research, Whmis. So let's hop to it here. Introduction to Whmis, Workplace Hazardous Material Information System. Whether we realize it or not, we are constantly coming in contact with hazardous materials in both the home and work environment. A wide range of materials. There are a wide range of materials and products which you may come in contact with that can be hazardous to your health if they are not used properly. Cleaning products, solvents, paint, glues, and toners are just a sample of some of the materials which, if not used properly, can have adverse effects on your health. What is Whmis? Whmis is short form for Workplace Hazardous Materials Information System. It is a nationwide system that was developed for the control and safe use of hazardous materials in the workplace. Whmis provides us with a standard classification and information system to help ensure that everyone in the work environment understands their role. With Whmis, information is provided to us through 1. Product labels, 2. Safety data sheets SDS, 3. Worker education programs. It is important that everyone within the workplace has an awareness of the controlled products in their immediate work environment, as well as the safe handling, storage, and disposal procedures for these materials. You must also know how to prevent or deal with an accident in the event of an emergency. It is a law. Throughout North America, occupational health and safety legislation has been shifting in recent years to a system of basic rights for workers. These basic rights include the right to know about the hazards a worker may encounter on the job. Occupational health and safety law combined with Whmis legislation means that everyone has a right to know about the safety and health hazards of materials used in their workplace. Whmis requirements are established by the Federal Hazardous Products Act and regulations which are administered by Health Canada. Each province and territory has its own Whmis legislation. Enforcement and penalties. In Canada, the Whmis regulations are enforced by federal and provincial territorial inspectors. Penalties for non-compliance can vary depending on the offense. With the changes in workplace health and safety legislation, any company or individual can now be charged with an offense. This would include the supplier, the employer, a supervisor, a manager, or a director. And lastly, the worker may also be held accountable if the recommended procedures were not followed. Why was Whmis created? In Canada, Whmis originally came into effect as a result of meetings between knowledgeable representatives of government, labor, and industry. These three parties worked together to ensure that the best interests of everyone involved were considered. Whmis became law in Canada through the introduction of a series of federal, provincial, and territorial legislation that came into effect in October of 1988. Whmis 2015, Globally Harmonized System. In February 2015, Health Canada introduced the new Hazardous Products Regulations, HPR. As a result, the Whmis legislation in Canada will change to include what is referred to as the Globally Harmonized System of Classification and Labeling of Chemicals, GHS. In Canada, this modified Whmis is referred to as Whmis 2015. The previous Controlled Product Regulations, CPR, and the Ingredient Disclosure List have been repealed. Whmis documents have changed. While Whmis 2015 includes new criteria for hazardous classification and requirements for labels and safety data sheets, the roles and responsibilities for everyone involved in the Whmis system, suppliers, employers, and workers did not change. Also, while the format for the documents and information presented to us has changed, the information that is available to us has really not changed. It is simply provided in a different format. GHS development. This GHS system was initially developed by an international team of hazard communication experts to the United Nations. Their goal is to aid in standardizing the communication of workplace hazards throughout the world. This system has been adopted by an increasing number of countries in recent years. One system for all. Transition period. To provide suppliers, employers, and workers adequate time to adjust to Whmis 2015, there was a transition period for implementing all the new rules. This transition period ended and came fully into effect of December 1st, 2018. DHS currently allows us the opportunity to periodically make changes and updates to keep in step with GHS and the rest of the world that uses this system. Having one system for all has many benefits as many workplace products are produced and purchased internationally. Our current transition period. We are currently in the middle of another 3-year transition period for Canadian Whmis. GHS legislation. Changes were enacted in December of 2022. However, the changes will not be fully enacted until December 14, 2025. The 3-year transition period gives suppliers, employers, and workers time to adjust to the changes and helps ensure consistency across Canada through coordination and alignment between federal, provincial, and territorial jurisdictions. Current transition period. Much of the change this time around relates to how your suppliers develop and communicate their information relating to a hazardous material. This will show up in your work environment with new supplier labels, new information sheets, safety data sheets, and also new workplace labels. For most workplaces, the biggest impact will be seen in changes to the flammable gases class as well as a new class of chemicals under pressure. We will be discussing these changes in greater detail throughout the course. Transition period. Lots of acronyms. HPA Hazardous Products Act, CPR Controlled Products Regulations, HPR Hazardous Products Regulations, GHS Globally Harmonized System, Whmis Workplace Hazardous Materials Information System. A hazardous product is defined as any product, mixture, material, or substance that is classified in accordance with the regulations. In Canada, all materials classified as a hazardous product that is intended for use, handling, storage, or disposal in the workplace must have safety data sheets. GHS transition. It is important that you keep in mind that you may be seeing labels and information for hazardous materials in your workplace that are outdated and do not conform with the new changes. If you come across old materials, make sure an effort is made to inform the person at your organization that is responsible for Whmis or a supervisor. Effort should then be made to ensure that the supplier is contacted for new information and that this information is made available to all in the workplace. Everyone in the workplace has responsibilities under the Whmis legislation. Suppliers of controlled products, employers, and of course, the worker. The responsibilities of each of these parties will be discussed in greater detail throughout the course. The role of government, provincial. In Canada, each provincial or territorial department is responsible for the administration and enforcement of its Occupational Health and Safety Act and supporting regulations. One of these regulations provides the Whmis system in each province or territory. All Whmis regulations are based on the same model to ensure consistency of Whmis legislation throughout Canada. The role of government federal. Provincial Whmis legislation does not apply to federal workplaces. In federal workplaces, important example banks, post offices, airports, provisions for Whmis are found in the Canada Labour Code and the Canadian Occupational Safety and Health Regulations. All other work environments are covered by provincial or territorial Whmis legislation. In provincial and territorial workplaces, the government department responsible for occupational health and safety issues like Whmis varies. Usually it is called either a Ministry or Department of Labor. In some jurisdictions, the Workers' Compensation Board or Commission has the responsibility for occupational health and safety. Legislation in your workplace. Under Whmis legislation, all work environments that use, handle, or store any hazardous products are required to provide training to staff and to contain a copy of the Whmis regulations. Whmis regulations are to be stored in a common area and easily accessible at all times by all employees. An electronic copy of the regulations is acceptable provided everyone is computer trained and the information is accessible by all employees. A 3-part system. Whmis is a 3-part information system that consists of the following: 1. Product labels, 2. Safety data sheets, 3. Worker education programs. The purpose of these 3 components is to ensure that everyone in the work environment understands everything they need to know about the use, storage, and disposal of hazardous materials in the workplace. By the end of this course, you will have reviewed these three components and will have much better understanding of how they will apply to your safety and workplace responsibilities. Product labels. A Whmis product label provides the basic information that you will need to know in order to handle a product safely. Product labels are intended to be attached to or printed directly on the product. The Whmis system standardizes the information that must be contained on the Whmis product label. There are two types of labels you will find in your work environment. 1. Supplier labels. 2. Workplace labels. The supplier label provides immediate access to information you may require when handling a chemical product. Under the Whmis system, a supplier of a controlled product is required to attach a label to all hazardous materials they supply before the materials are shipped. A supplier can be defined as a manufacturer, processor, or a packager of a controlled product. A supplier also includes anyone who sells or imports a controlled product. Supplier responsibilities. With the Whmis system, all suppliers are required to communicate all hazard information in a standard manner to all purchasers of a controlled product. The Whmis system requires suppliers to provide a supplier label on all controlled products or containers of controlled products. The supplier must also provide more detailed information concerning the controlled product in the form of a safety data sheet. Safety data sheets are a very important component of Whmis, and they will be examined in further detail later in the course. Info found on a supplier label. General. The supplier is obliged to provide the purchaser with a package labeling and a safety data sheet. A supplier label will have the following 7 sections of information on it. 1. Product identifier. 2. Supplier identifier. 3. Pictograms, hazard symbols. 4. Signal word. 5. Hazard statements. 6. Precautionary statement. 7. Supplemental info. Take a moment to familiarize yourself with these components of a supplier label. We will now take a closer look at each of these. Info found on a supplier label. Product identifier. 1. Product identifier. This section should include all names associated with a controlled product. In some cases, this information may be provided as a number. The product name or number must always be identical to the product identifier on the safety data sheet. This info will include the brand name, chemical name, common names, generic names, trade names, any names associated with the product. Info found on a supplier label. Supplier identifier. 2. Supplier identifier. The information found on the label for supplier identification will include the name of the supplier, the manufacturer or the importer's name, phone number, and the location of the principal place of business. Info found on a supplier label. Pictograms. 3. Pictogram hazard symbols. The Whmis pictogram hazard symbol system is an effective way to bring immediate attention to a hazardous product. This is a very important component of the Whmis system, and you should take care to familiarize yourself with these symbols. With Whmis 2015, the identifier has changed from the familiar circle to the red diamond. For the most part, both the old and the new symbols are very similar. However, there are some differences and also some new symbols for you to know. Identifying pictogram hazard symbols. 3. Pictogram hazard symbols. The pictogram hazard symbol system used for Whmis is subject to a number of regulatory specifications. The diamond pictograms may look familiar to many, as they are similar to the symbols used to indicate TDG hazards. Also, much of the content of these symbols remains the same as the old system. The one exception that remains a black circle is the biohazardous class, which is a symbol that remains unique to the Canadian system. These materials are not classified under the globally harmonized system, but they are still regulated in Canada under Whmis regulations. Information found on a supplier label. Signal words. 4. Signal word. A signal word is meant to quickly alert you to the degree or level of a hazard of a product. If a signal word is assigned to a specific hazard class, it must be shown on the label and listed in the safety data sheets. Most labels will include one of the following signal words: danger to indicate a severe hazard, warning to indicate a less severe hazard. Information found on a supplier label hazard statements. 5 hazard statements. Hazard statements provide a short explanations of the hazard associated with a controlled product. These statements are standardized phrases meant to alert the reader to potential hazards, as well as the potential severity of the hazard. Example: cause eye irritation, fatal if inhaled or swallowed, extremely flammable. Information found on a supplier label. Precautionary statements. 6 precautionary statements. Precautionary statements contain the preventative information you must follow when working with or in close proximity to a controlled product. Caution: do not drop or roll. Important example: any type of compressed gas. Keep product away from combustible materials. Wear suitable protective clothing when handling product. Do not add water to this product. Avoid prolonged or repeated contact with skin. There are 5 types of precautionary statements. 1. General. 2. Prevention. 3. Response. 4. Storage. 5. Disposal. Precautionary statements will briefly describe measures to be taken to prevent incidents from occurring and what to do if an incident does occur. Information found on a supplier label. Precautionary statements. 7. Supplemental info. Supplemental label information. Some supplemental information may be required based on classification and use. This may include info relating to chemical composition, precautionary actions, or additional hazards. The information provided in this section must not contradict or detract from the standardized information. First aid procedures. First aid procedures may also be included on the supplier label. These measures outline immediate general first aid procedures that you should follow when dealing with an accident involving a hazardous material. More detailed first aid information can be found in the safety data sheets. The following is an example of the first aid procedures found on a controlled product. First aid: remove patient to fresh air, flush exposed skin and eyes with water, remove contaminated clothing. If product is ingested, do not induce vomiting. Call a physician immediately. Supplier labels may also include other information. For example, the hazardous ingredients found in the product. Tip: your work environment is required to contain the appropriate number and kind of first aid kits. Familiarize yourself. Remember, whenever you work with a controlled product, it is important that you familiarize yourself with all the information contained on the supplier label before getting started. It is also important that you review and familiarize yourself with this information each time you set out to use a hazardous product. Never assume. When working with hazardous materials, prevention is always the best solution. Labeling requirement variations. Different Whmis labeling rules will apply in some cases. Specific labeling rules will apply to the following: small containers, bulk shipments, lab products, samples. Supplier labels bulk shipments. Bulk shipments of controlled products. If a controlled product is shipped in containers of more than 454 liters, 100 gallons, the supplier must do one or more of the following: send the supplier label separately, add the supplier label information to the safety data sheets, send the information as a separate document. Supplier label small containers. If a controlled product container holds 100 milliliters or less, the supplier label needs to show only the following information: product name, supplier identifier, hazard symbols, reference to the availability of safety data sheets. Workplace labels. A workplace label is designed to provide the basic information a worker needs to identify and safely handle a controlled product in the workplace. The information required on a workplace label is much less than is required on the supplier label. An example of when a workplace label becomes especially necessary is when a controlled product is transferred from its original container into an unmarked container. It is easy to understand the hazardous potential and unnecessary dangers associated with having unmarked hazardous materials in any workplace. Information found on a workplace label. The format for a workplace label can vary, but it must contain the following 3 components. 1. Product identifier. The name or names associated with the product. To avoid confusion, you must ensure that the product identifier on all workplace labels is identical to the product identifier on the safety data sheet of a product. 2. Information for the safe handling of the controlled product. This information must include the precautions necessary to reduce health risk and injury. 3. A statement advising that the safety data sheet for the control product is available. Workplace labels. The information for the safe handling of a product might include the hazard symbols, signal words, and/or hazard phrases associated with a controlled product. This is acceptable provided the worker is trained and knowledgeable in the necessary precautions associated with the product. When to use a workplace label. When any controlled product is transferred from a supplier container to any other container, the new container must be labeled with a workplace label. Workplace labels must be used in the following situations: on a storage container for receiving bulk shipments, not necessary if the supplier provides labels; on a portable container into which a product has been transferred by a worker where the container is used by other workers, or for longer than the worker's shift. Finger tubing systems transporting controlled products are also considered portable containers. In this circumstance, a color-coded system is acceptable if the system is thoroughly communicated to all workers. On a supplier container that has eligible, damaged, or missing labels. In this circumstance, effort should be made to replace the original label on the storage containers of all controlled products produced on-site. Items on a workplace label. Take time to remember the 3 sections of information that are to be placed on a workplace label. 1. Product identifier, name. 2. Safe handling information. 3. A statement advising of safety data sheets. In certain situations, other types of hazard identification may be used in the workplace. For example, labels, signs, and place cards used on tanks and piping. Some workplaces use color coding on piping, for example. Whatever system is used in your work environment, it is important that you learn and understand the information provided to you to work safely. Pictograms and hazard symbols are useful as a visual aid in identifying hazardous materials. All hazardous materials must be labeled with at least one of the classes of symbols. Each class of hazardous materials has its own pictogram, which is easily recognizable due to its red diamond. Pictograms' hazard symbols are divided into 2 major classes: physical hazards, compressed gases, corrosiveness, explosives, flammable oxidizers; 2. Health hazards, acute toxicity, health hazards, irritants, and corrosives. Hazard symbols. With the Whmis 1988 system, we had hazard symbols divided by class. As discussed with Whmis 2015, these are classified as either one of 2 groups: a physical hazard or a health hazard. Hazard symbols, Whmis 1988. Class A, compressed gas; Class B, flammable and combustible materials; Class C, oxidizing materials; Class D1, poisonous and infectious, immediate and serious toxic effects; Class D2, poisonous and infectious materials causing other toxic effects; Class D3, poisonous and infectious, biohazardous infectious materials; Class E, corrosive materials; Class F, dangerously reactive materials. With the Whmis 2015 globally harmonized system, we now have a new system of symbols. Physical hazards, compressed gas. This red diamond-shaped symbol indicates that the contents of the container are under pressure. Anything done to weaken the structure of the container could result in an explosion or dramatic release of pressure. A compressed gas is a material which is a gas at normal room temperature and pressure, and is packaged under compression. The gas cylinder pictograms is used for the following classes and categories: gases under pressure, compressed gas, liquefied gas, refrigerator liquefied gas, and dissolved gas. Chemicals under pressure. Both the flame and cylinder pictograms are used for chemicals under pressure. Chemicals under pressure is a new category of classification that came about as a result of the new amendments that will come fully into effect in December 2025. Oxygen and propane are common examples of materials that are supplied as a compressed gas. Physical hazard, flammable material. Flammable material are solids, liquids, or gases that will ignite and continue to burn if exposed to a flame or a source of ignition. Some materials may burst into flames spontaneously given the wrong circumstances. These materials may also be explosive in certain situations or react with other materials to produce a flammable material. Butane and gasoline are examples of commonly used flammable materials. The safety data sheets will provide us with the info on the flash point of a material. The flash point is the lowest temperature at which vapor from the material will ignite. A lower flash point indicates a higher risk, as the vapors may ignite more easily. Flammable material hazard. The flame pictogram is used for the following classes: flammable gases, aerosols, flammable liquids, flammable solids, self-heating substances and mixtures which, in contact with water, emit flammable gases, self-reactive substances and mixtures, organic peroxides, pyrophoric liquids, materials that can ignite spontaneously when exposed to air, pyrophoric solids, chemicals under pressure, new category. Each of these classes will further break down into types of categories depending on their unique properties. Be sure to refer to the safety data sheets for each material you are using to learn more about the specific properties of a hazardous product. Physical hazards. Oxidizing materials. Oxidizers produce oxygen or another oxidizing substance that can cause or contribute to the combustion of another substance. They can burn without air and can intensify fire in combustible materials. Effort should be made to ensure these materials are not used or stored near any source of ignition or other flammable materials. Chlorine is an example of an oxidizing material. Physical hazards. Corrosive materials. Corrosives can cause decomposition of other materials, important example metals, or damage human tissue such as skin or eyes. Materials that are very acidic or alkaline may burn your skin or eyes on contact, resulting in permanent damage. Vapors from these materials may also have the same effect, damaging skin, eyes, or lungs. Hydrochloric acid and ammonia are examples of highly corrosive materials. The pH scale will indicate how corrosive or alkaline a chemical is. The higher the number, the more alkaline a chemical is, and conversely a lower number indicates the acidity. Physical hazards. Explosive materials. The pictogram will alert the worker of an explosive or reactivity hazard. Health hazards. Acute toxicity and poisonous. The skull and crossbones alert us to materials that are known to be poisonous, which can cause death or toxicity with short exposure, even in small amounts. Health hazards. The health hazard symbol is a new symbol that is brought to us by GHS. This pictogram indicates a variety of hazards that may cause, or are suspected of causing, serious health effects. When you see this symbol, you must investigate further and know and understand the hazards associated with the product. The symbol, along with the acute toxicity symbol, is meant to eliminate some of the confusion with having multiple subclasses. This symbol alerts us to a wide variety of potential health hazards. Below are some of the health hazards associated that this class is alerting you to: respiratory sensitization, carcinogenicity, mutagenicity, reproductive toxicity, aspiration toxicity, specific organ toxicity. Additional information on the health hazard is available on the safety data sheet for each hazardous product. Health hazards. Irritants. Irritants can result in health issues such as rash or itching. Personal protective equipment will be your best solution when handling these chemicals. Environmental toxicity. This pictogram indicates that the hazardous material contains environmental toxins, and if not used and disposed of properly, will cause damage to the environment. This symbol is easily identifiable on labels and data sheets by a depiction of a dead fish and dead tree. Biohazardous infectious material D3. As mentioned previously in the course, this is the one Whmis symbol and is an exception and does not change between the old Whmis system and the new Whmis 2015 GHS. The biohazard symbol is not classified under the GHS system, but these materials are still regulated under the Whmis regulations in Canada. Biohazardous materials refer to any organism or the toxins produced by these organisms that have been shown or are believed to be a biological hazard to either humans or animals. These materials are usually limited to laboratory and test environments. What are safety data sheets? A safety data sheet is a technical document that provides the information everybody needs to know about a controlled product. The safety data sheet is the main source of information for obtaining knowledge about product usage and hazards associated with the product. Safety data sheets are required for all hazardous products sold, distributed, or imported into Canada. There are 16 sections of information found on a safety data sheet. Examining the safety data sheets. Safety data sheets contain all the information found on supplier labels, but it also includes a large amount of detailed data that is useful to everyone involved in all workplaces. All controlled products are required by law to have safety data sheets information. If you are unsure about any product, ask the supplier manufacturer for more info, and of course, consult the safety data sheet. Development of the safety data sheets. Safety data sheets are usually written by the manufacturer supplier of the product. There are companies that will provide laboratory and/or technical advisory services which will aid a supplier in developing the safety data sheets. There are circumstances with the safety data sheets where an employer may be required to prepare one for a product that is produced and used only in that workplace. This is necessary as the worker will still require that information to work safely. Safety data sheets when a change is required. Safety data sheets is required to be up to date at the time of sale of the hazardous product. The safety data sheet is required to be updated when the supplier becomes aware of any significant new data that the end user needs to be aware of. The safety data sheet is required to be updated when there is new information that changes how the hazardous product is classified or when there are changes to the handling, storage, or disposal requirements. Safety data sheets will be required to be updated within 90 days of the supplier being aware of the new information. If you purchase a product within the 90-day time period, the supplier must inform you of any significant new data and the data on which it became available in writing. Safety Data Sheet Section 16. With the Whmis 2015 GHS system, the safety data sheet must provide a date of last revision in the last section of the Safety Data Sheet Section 16, other information. This makes it easy to tell if a safety data sheet has been updated by simply checking this date and comparing it to the date on any other safety data sheet. It should be noted that there is no requirement for the supplier to provide an updated safety data sheet to past purchasers of a given product. What should you know about safety data sheets? Certain sections of the safety data sheet will be more important to some than others. For example, a lab tech analyzing samples might utilize different information than a healthcare worker in the event of an emergency. A worker dispensing chemical into a secondary container might require different information yet again. The important thing is that everyone should know the name of the chemicals they are handling, the hazards associated with these chemicals, and the safe handling, storage, and disposal procedures. Lastly, you must know what to do in the event of an emergency. Information found on safety data sheets. Safety data sheets contain a large amount of important data. Briefly, the information you will find on safety data sheets is as follows. Detailed information on the product including who made it, hazards of a product, how to use a product safely, prevention, what will happen if the hazard information is not followed, what to do if an incident occurs, how to recognize adverse health effects, spill control and disposal information. Safety data sheets in your workplace. All controlled products must have safety data sheets that are specific to each individual product or material. The product name and the supplier name on the safety data sheets must correspond with the material in use in the workplace. Make sure that the product you are using is being used how the manufacturer intended. With an endless multitude of chemicals and work applications, it is important that you take time to learn the intended use of a product. If not, information provided on the safety data sheet and workplace label may not apply, or the protective measures listed in the document may not be adequate. Safety data sheet. Supplier responsibilities. It is the supplier's responsibility to produce and supply an up-to-date and comprehensive safety data sheet for all controlled products. Be sure that you have access to all safety data sheets for all controlled products in your work environment. Safety data sheet. Employer responsibilities. It is the employer's responsibility to obtain all safety data sheets from their suppliers for all controlled products found in their work environment. Safety data sheets must be available to all employees at all times, at all work sites. This information can be provided on a computer providing all employees have access to and are trained on using the computer system. A hard copy must also be provided to any employee upon request. To comply with legislation, the employer must ensure that All safety data sheets are updated if there are any changes to a product. If a controlled product is made in the workplace, the employer has a responsibility to produce safety data sheet. Safety data sheet responsibilities. All employees are responsible for taking the time to familiarize themselves with and use the necessary information in the safety data sheet for each controlled product and their work environment. Information found on safety data sheets. Safety data sheets can be provided in varying formats, but they must comply with Whmis regulation by containing the necessary information required for 16 sections. The safety data sheet is separated into sections so that the user can easily and quickly find the information they need. Whmis 2015 GHS Safety Data Sheet. The Whmis 1988 MSDS contains 9 sections of information. To standardize the process and also make it easier to find info, the Whmis GHS Safety Data Sheet now contains the following 16 sections of information. Sections of info found on Safety Data Sheet Whmis 2015 GHS. 1. Product identification and use. 2. Hazardous identification. 3. Composition of ingredients. 4. First aid measures. 5. Firefighting and explosion data. 6. Accidental release measures. 7. Handling and storage. 8. Exposure controls and personal protection. 9. Physical and chemical properties. 10. Stability and reactivity information. 11. Toxicological information, health effects. 12. Ecological information. 13. Disposal considerations. 14. Transport information. 15. Regulatory information. 16. Other information. Many suppliers have been providing information in the 16-part format for years. Section 1. Product identification and use. Information in this section will include the product name and any name commonly used to identify a product. Also required in this section is a simple explanation of the intended use of the product and any restrictions of use of the product. If the way you use the product in the workplace does not match the intended use, you should discuss it immediately with your supervisor and/or health and safety rep. In Section 1 of the Safety Data Sheet, you will also find important information about contacting the supplier or manufacturer, including business name, address, and emergency telephone number. Any restrictions on that number must be listed. Section 2. Hazard Identification. Section 2 will summarize any hazards related to a product, the necessary precautions to take, and what to do in the event of an incident or emergency. The safety data sheets cover information about the potential hazards associated with the use of a product. More information can be found by asking your supervisor. These decisions may require the help of a safety professional or someone with chemical safety knowledge. Section 2. Hazard Identification. In this section you will find information on the hazard classification class category, label elements, pictograms, image, or the name of a symbol, signal word, hazard statements, precautionary statements, irritant, for example. Section 3. Composition of ingredients. Information in this section will include chemical name, common name, CAS registry number, chemical composition. All hazardous ingredients as well as the concentration of the ingredient must be identified when available. A chemical abstracts registry number, CAS, will be included to help identify hazardous ingredients. Section 3. Trade secrets. In certain circumstances, manufacturers can apply to have the exact chemical ingredients and concentrations of a product confidential. This may be because they want to keep proprietary information secret to competitors. If a trade secret is granted, health and safety information must still be made available and information provided to medical professionals upon request. Section 4. First aid measures. This section of the safety data sheet contains the information you will need to know relating to the immediate first aid treatment in case of an accident. Information will be broken down based on routes of entry, inhalation, skin contact, eye contact, ingestion. The safety data sheet will also list the most important symptoms and effects, acute or delayed, as well as immediate medical attention and special treatment requirements. This section of the safety data sheet will also list possible long-term health effects of overexposure to a hazardous material. Remember, always be sure you know the appropriate first aid measures associated with the product before you use it. Section 5. Firefighting measures. This section of the safety data sheet contains information on the conditions of flammability, the circumstances in which a controlled product may catch fire or explode. Fire and explosion data is designed to provide you with the knowledge on how to avoid these situations, what to expect if the information is not followed, as well as information for properly extinguishing a fire. In this section you will find information on suitable extinguishing agents, unsuitable extinguishing agents, specific hazards related to improper use of a controlled product, and lastly, any special protective equipment or precautions for firefighters. Be sure to understand the situations in which any material in your work environment may become a fire and/or explosion hazard, as well as the proper techniques and equipment for extinguishing different types of fires. Section 5. Firefighting measures. Flash point. The flash point of a controlled product refers to the minimum temperature at which a liquid gives off enough vapor to ignite in test circumstances. When you find a controlled product with a low flash point, it means that the material presents a higher hazard of catching fire or exploding. Upper flammable limit, lower flammable limit. These limits represent the amount of gaseous vapors that mix with air to produce a threat of fire. The auto-ignition temperature refers to the temperature that a hazardous material will ignite on its own due to spontaneous combustion. A low auto-ignition temperature indicates a higher likelihood of ignition or explosion. Section 5. Firefighting measures. Fires are categorized into 4 different classes, Class A, B, C, and D. Familiarize yourself beforehand with what type of fires you may encounter in your work environment. Ensure that the proper fire extinguishers are available, that they are properly and regularly serviced, and that everyone knows where they are located. Also ensure that the fire prevention and evacuation plans are in place. If you are unsure about anything relating to fire extinguishers or fire prevention, contact your local fire department for more information. Section 5. Firefighting measures. Explosion data. This section of the safety data sheet contains specific information on the factors that could lead to a material being an explosion hazard. For example, in this section you will find information on the material's sensitivity to mechanical impact or static discharge. Special considerations. This section of the safety data sheet is where you can find additional fire explosion hazard information, which may be specific to a particular product. For example, some controlled products may pose additional fire explosion hazards when mixed with other products. Others may produce dangerous byproducts when burning. Section 6. Accidental release measures. Section 6 contains information relating to what you will need to do in the event of an accidental release of the controlled product. This information will help protect you, your coworkers, as well as equipment and the environment. Accidental release measures will cover personal precautions, protective equipment, and emergency procedures, methods and materials for containment and cleaning up. Spill control and hazardous material disposal. Spill control measures and emergency procedures are found in the safety data sheet for a hazardous product. It is necessary to ensure that designated individuals receive instruction in specific spill control procedures as it applies to the use and concentration of materials found in the workplace. Containment and neutralization using acceptable compounds intended for that purpose are preferred methods of spill control. Only when you are thoroughly familiar with the substances and the steps necessary to contain and clean up a spill should you attempt to do so. All incidents should also be immediately reported to the workplace manager or safety officer, and proper disposal information consulted and followed. Section 7. Handling and storage. Precautions for safe handling of the hazardous material. Conditions for safe storage. The information provided here will also include any incompatible materials which must be avoided when handling or storing a material, waste disposal and waste container design, special shipping information. Section 7. Preventative measures. This section of the safety data sheet contains information on the control measures associated with the handling of a product. For example, here you will find info on personal protective equipment, important example gloves, respirators, and the necessary work procedures associated with use. In addition to personal protective equipment, the preventative measures section will also provide information on handling procedure, specific engineering controls, important example, ventilation system requirements, containment of leaks or spills, waste disposal and waste container design, storage requirements, special shipping information. Section 7 Preventative Measures. Spill control and hazardous material disposal. Spill control measures and emergency procedures are found in the safety data sheet for a hazardous product. It is necessary to ensure that designated individuals receive instruction and specific spill control procedures as it applies to the use and concentration of materials found in the workplace. Containment and neutralization using acceptable compound intended for that purpose are preferred methods of spill control. Only when you are thoroughly familiar with the substances and the steps necessary to contain and clean up a spill should you attempt to do so. All incidents should also be immediately reported to the workplace manager, safety officer, and proper disposal information consulted and followed. Section 7 Preventative Measures. Spill control and hazardous material disposal. If you are not familiar with a substance or unable to deal with a spill, the following steps must be adhered to. Notify all colleagues in the immediate area that a spill or a leak has occurred. When necessary, evacuate staff and visitors from the surrounding area. Gather at designated assembly points. Report the location, quantity, and composition of the spill to the necessary parties, manager, emergency personnel, government. Individuals that are not thoroughly familiar with the material involved must never attempt to take control of the cleanup of a hazardous spill. If you work in proximity to any hazardous material, you must familiarize yourself with all spill control and evacuation procedures associated with the product. Even a small amount of a spilt hazardous substance should be properly cleaned up, disposed of, and reported to the safety officer manager. Important example, mercury thermometer break. No hazardous material should be disposed of without consulting the safety data sheet. Section 7 Preventative Measures. Further information concerning spill control or waste disposal of specific chemicals can be requested from the government department responsible for occupational health and safety in your workplace, federal, provincial. Section 8 Exposure Controls, Personal Protection. The info found in this section of the safety data sheet relates to exposure controls and personal measures required to limit hazards. Control parameters including occupational exposure guidelines or biological exposure limits and the source of those values. Information on containment of leaks or spills. Necessary engineering controls, for example, ventilation system requirements or storage temp requirements. Individual protection measures. Important example, personal protective equipment. This section of the safety data sheet contains information on the control measures associated with a product's handling. For example, here you will find information on personal protective equipment, important example, gloves, respirators, and the work procedures associated with the use of a product. Exposure limits. Exposure limits are provided based on a healthy employee working on an 8-hour shift, 5 days a week. The limits established also take into account time you spend away from work recovering from exposure. The goal is to ensure that a worker is not exposed to any hazardous material for a period which will bring them outside a safe range. Short-term exposure limits, or STEL, provide us with the maximum concentration of exposure that is safe for only a short period, minutes. Section 9. Physical and chemical properties. There are many ways to classify the physical and chemical properties of a hazardous material. This information is very detailed and provides valuable information needed for all professions to do their job. Appearance, physical state, color, etc. Odor threshold, pH, melting point, freezing point, initial boiling point, boiling range, flash point, evaporation rate, flammability, solid gas, lower flammable explosive limit, upper flammable explosive limit, vapor pressure, vapor density, relative density, solubility, partition coefficient, and N-octanol water, autoignition temperature, decomposition temperature, viscosity. Section 10. Stability and reactivity. This section of the safety data sheet contains information on the conditions under which a controlled product may become chemically unstable. For example, some controlled products become dangerous when they are mixed with water. In this section you will find the name of any substance or class of substance with which a product is incompatible, You will also find the conditions of reactivity and any hazardous decomposition products associated with the product. Reactivity, chemical stability, possibility of hazardous reactions, conditions to avoid, important examples, static discharge, shock, or vibration, incompatible materials, hazardous decomposition products. Section 11. Toxicological information. In Section 11 you will find concise but complete descriptions of the various toxic health effects of a chemical and the data used to identify those effects, including information on the likely routes of exposure, inhalation, ingestion, skin, and eye contact, symptoms related to the physical, chemical, and toxicological characteristics, delayed and immediate effects, and chronic effects from short-term and long-term exposure, numerical measures of toxicity. Section 11. Toxicological information. The toxicological section of safety data sheets contain detailed data on how a hazardous material may affect your health. You will find information on how hazardous materials enter the body, as well as the health effects associated with exposure. Routes of entry. Potential routes of entry are many and include skin contact, skin absorption, eye contact, inhalation, and ingestion information. Toxic effects of acute exposure. Toxic effects of acute exposure are changes experienced within a short period of time following an exposure, important example, minutes, hours. Toxic effects of chronic exposure. Toxic effects of chronic exposure are changes experienced over a long period of time following repeated exposure, important example, months, years. Exposure limits. This information provides data on acceptable limits on how long you can safely be exposed to a hazardous material while working. Irritancy of product. Sensitization of product. Carcinogenicity. This term refers to the ability of a product to cause cancer. Reproductive toxicity. This term refers to the ability of a product to affect reproductive processes upon exposure. Teratogenicity. This term refers to the ability of a product to cause congenital birth defects. Mutagenicity. This term refers to the ability of a product to cause changes to the genes of the user upon exposure. Name of toxicologically synergistic products. These product names may be necessary due to lack of information on the product. The information provided may include a comparison of the toxic effects other products have in common with the product you are using. Section 12 to 15 of the safety data sheets. Section 12 to 15 require headings to be present, but under Canadian regulations, the supplier has the option to not provide information in these sections. Section 12. Ecological information. Ecotoxicity, persistence and degradability, bioaccumulative potential, mobility in soil, other adverse effects. Section 13. Disposal considerations. Section 13 contains information on safe handling for disposal and methods of disposal for hazardous product. This information will also include solutions for contaminated packaging. Section 14. Transport information. This information relates to the transport of the hazardous material and the information required for the transportation of dangerous goods. Regulations in Canada. UN number, UN proper shipping name, transport hazard classes, packing group, environmental hazards, transport in bulk, if applicable, special precautions. Section 15. Regulatory information. This section will contain information relating to safety, health, and environmental regulations specific to the product. Section 16. Other information. This is where you will find the date of the latest revision of the safety data sheet. Who is responsible for Whmis training? Everyone in the work environment has a responsibility in the Whmis education process. 1. The employer. With respect to worker education, the employer has the duty of providing Whmis training to all employees who work with a controlled product or in proximity of a controlled product. The employer must also be educated to understand the Whmis system themselves. Employer responsibilities. In short, the employer is responsible for teaching you about safe handling, storage, and disposal of all chemical products. You must also receive instruction on the use of personal protective equipment and safe workplace practices. The employer must also communicate any outside labeling and identification systems that are in place. When a hazard is present, the employer must find solutions to eliminate or reduce any hazards associated with working with a product. Employer responsibilities. The employer must meet the following responsibilities in the development of a Whmis program. On each controlled product in the workplace, the employer must provide the worker with all hazard information received from the supplier and any additional information they have available concerning the use, storage, and handling of a controlled product. Hazard information must be accessible to all employees during all shifts. If an employer makes safety data sheets available on a computer terminal, the employer must provide all employees with access to a working computer at all times, as well as training in the access of computer-stored safety data sheets. Employer responsibilities. Hazard control. Eliminate, remove the product or process from the work environment. This would involve finding another way to complete the task. Substitute, find another safer product that will do the task safely and effectively. Engineering controls, design methods to eliminate or reduce hazard. For example, hood, fans to remove vapor hazards. Employer responsibilities. Whmis training. Whmis training. The employer is responsible for implementing a program of instruction on controlled products. This program needs to include the following 5 components. 1. Whmis training for employees on labeling and safety data sheets. 2. Training in the procedures for safe use, storage, handling, and disposal of controlled products. 3. Training in the procedures to be followed in the case of an emergency involving a controlled product. Training in the use of the methods of identification used in each workplace that involve controlled products not found in a typical container. Products which are being held or transferred need to be identified, and a system of identification must be developed. Methods may include warning signs, symbols, or color number or letter codes. These methods are typically used when transferring controlled products in pipes, piping systems, process and reacts vessels, tank cars and tank trucks, conveyor belts, etc. 5. Instruction on the procedures to be followed when fugitive emissions are present. A fugitive emission is a term used to describe a small amount of a controlled product that is known to escape from the process, equipment, or emission-controlled equipment. The employer additional requirements. Additional info or instruction will need to be provided to the worker when new chemical products enter the workplace, new tasks involving the use of chemicals are assigned, new procedures are introduced to the workplace, new responsibilities are assigned. Employer responsibilities, development and review. If your organization has 20 or more employees, the employer must consult with the Joint Health and Safety Committee or the Health and Safety Representative about the content and delivery of the Whmis program in their workplace. This is to help ensure that the training program is meeting the needs of the work environment and the results in a worker being able to apply the information they learn. Regardless of the number of employees, the employer is responsible for reviewing the workplace Whmis program at least once a year. This must be done more often if conditions at the workplace change or if new hazard information becomes available. 2. The supplier. As we discussed earlier in this course, a supplier has no direct responsibility for the education of workers. However, the supplier does play an important role in the education process by providing up-to-date and comprehensive supplier labels and safety data sheets to the employer. 3. The employee. The employee plays an important role in the Whmis process. Part of your responsibilities are being fulfilled by taking this course. Another part of your responsibilities will be fulfilled by using the information you learned in the course in your workplace. Employees are responsible for receiving, learning, and applying the information that the employer provides on controlled products. Employees are also responsible for informing the employer of any circumstance where they do not have adequate information on a controlled product. Employees must work with the employer in the development and review of all Whmis program when acting as a health and safety representative, or if they are a member of the Joint Health and Safety Committee. All staff have the potential of being adversely affected by hazardous products. If you take the time to note the number of controlled products you run into during a day, you may be surprised. For example, something as inconspicuous as changing photocopy toner or printering can have adverse health effects if you do not adhere to the appropriate information. There are a wide variety of common products that staff may come in contact with while working. For example, glue, solvents, lubricants, paints, and cleaning products. Take the time to learn about the products that affect you in your work environment. More information about Whmis, the workplace hazardous materials. Information system regulations apply to all workplaces that use, store, and handle controlled products. There are a few circumstances involving potentially hazardous products where the Whmis regulations do not apply. They are as follows: 1. Whmis exemptions, 2. restricted applications, 3. hazardous waste. We will now take a closer look at each of these categories. 1. Whmis exemptions. Whmis legislation both federally and provincially does not apply to wood or products made of wood. This includes products such as lumber, plywood, particle board, and wood products coated with additives such as paint or preservatives. Additives may, however, be subject to Whmis legislation before they are included in the finished product. Some chemical products made from wood, but lacking the physical properties of wood, are not considered wood products and therefore are subject to Whmis requirements. Important example, turpentine. Tobacco or any products made of tobacco, these materials are governed by their own federal legislation. Manufactured articles. A manufactured article refers to any item that is formed to a specific shape or design during its manufacture, whose intended use depends on its shape or design, and under normal conditions of use will not expose people to a controlled product. Products which are being transported or handled under the requirements of the Transportation or Dangerous Goods Act, TDG. These materials are covered by the TDG Act and regulations while in transit, or become subject to Whmis regulations at the point of loading and unloading. 2. Restricted applications, partially exempt products. Partially exempt products are materials which are exempted from the Whmis legislation because they are subject to labeling and information requirements under other federal legislation. As a result of this federal exemption, the employer is not required to obtain supplier labels or safety data sheets to use these materials. An example must still deliver training on the safe handling of these materials. Workplace labels must also be used when these materials are present or used in the workplace, or when they are transferred to different containers. If safety data sheets are available for any product, they should always be made available. The guidelines for the use, storage, handling, and disposal of these products are covered under their respective acts. Partially exempt products fall into the following categories: products within the meaning of the Explosives Act. Explosives and blasting agents are excluded from Whmis because they are regulated by the Explosives Act and regulations. A cosmetic device, drug, or food within the meaning of the Food and Drug Act, cosmetics and prescriptions. In order for a cosmetic material to qualify for an exemption under Whmis, it must be sold and presented for use as a cosmetic. If intended for use other than this purpose, the Whmis requirements apply. For example, acetone is found in consumer nail polish remover products and in this form is exempt from Whmis requirements. When used as an industrial cleaning agent, this same material becomes subject to the Whmis requirements. The Food and Drug Act is administered by Health and Welfare Canada. 2. Partially exempt products. A controlled product within the meaning of the Pest Control Products Act. Pesticides. The Pest Control Products Act is administered by Agricultural Canada. A controlled product within the meaning of the Atomic Energy Control Act. Radioactive substances. These substances are strictly controlled and are used primarily in medicine and dentistry, or in testing in laboratory environments. The transportation and usage of these hazardous materials is administered by the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. A restricted material that is packaged as a consumer product. The partial exemption for consumer goods applies to products that are packaged for sale to consumers through the retail system. Whmis requirements may still apply to these products. For example, bleach when sold as a consumer product is partially exempt, however becomes subject to Whmis requirements when used in the workplace. Under the Whmis regulations, a controlled product cannot be used, stored, or handled in the workplace unless the employer has complied with the Whmis requirements regarding labels, safety data sheets, and worker training. What would you do if a hazardous material arrived at your workplace and you do not fulfill these requirements? Under the Whmis system, the employer is allowed to store a controlled product in the workplace while trying to obtain a label or safety data sheet from a supplier, or while trying to obtain the information needed to produce a workplace label or safety data sheet. This is considered acceptable if the employer fixes either a workplace label or a label stating that the product is hazardous and cannot be used or handled at the workplace until further information is obtained. If a supplier informs you that labels or safety data sheets are not available for a controlled product, you should immediately notify the government department responsible for the occupational health and safety in your jurisdiction. You may also receive a controlled product that has been imported into Canada and shipped directly to your workplace that does not have the proper Whmis labeling. In this circumstance, the employer is required to label the controlled product with a label that meets the requirements of a supplier label as outlined in the controlled products regulations. 3. Hazardous waste. The Whmis regulations have limited applications to hazardous waste. Where any hazardous waste is generated or stored in the workplace, the employer is expected to identify all containers containing hazardous waste. Develop a method of hazardous waste container identification that is understood by all workers. This may include a number of methods. Important example, color coding or warning signs. Train any worker who may be exposed to hazardous waste regarding the material's safe handling and storage. While the employer is required to comply with the above, they are not required to provide workplace labels or safety data sheets for containers or hazardous waste. And this video was created for educational purposes only. Hope you enjoyed listening. My code name is Will. I'm Professor Christopher Brunet, leader of research scientist, ufologist, psychic computer technician, computer programmer, philanthropist, writer, mathematician, artist, photographer, film producer, chef, animal, and nature lover. My passion is world peace. Have a great day.